Introducing the DC Implosion! With more pages! More stories! And the most exciting superheroes in comics! Beginning June 1st! For something as niche as it is, there sure are a lot of comics being published right now. I would genuinely like to know if there is anyone reading all of this, because I'll be frank, if someone just gave me access to all the titles being published by a single company like DC or Marvel every month completely free, I don't think I'd have the time to read it all, much less appreciate what each creative team is trying to say. It would all just blend together. However, this is by no means a modern problem, which segues nicely into the topic of this video. In the 70s, Marvel dominated the comic market, becoming the leading seller of comics in the United States, a position they hold to this day outside of a few minor blips here and there. DC tried to combat their dominance with an initiative titled the DC Implosion, which was meant to expand the number of comics published by them to over 50, which was quite the number at the time. Well, let's just say explosion may have been an apt choice of words, considering the whole thing blew up in their faces, as in a matter of months they were left publishing around 26 titles, 8 less than before the initiative. This naturally led to the coining of the sarcastic fan term DC Implosion. So what exactly happened? Well, for starters, now, as I wasn't there personally, this is a bit of speculation, but I don't think I'm too off the mark here. Marvel had some very innovative titles for the time, some of which have not aged well at all, but others are truly timeless. I know that word has been overused to meaninglessness, but as someone who has read the earliest issues of Spider-Man very recently, I was blown away by how similar the initial premise of the character remains to the interpretation that remains in the public consciousness. Even Superman and Batman needed a lot more fine-tuning before they became the versions everyone loves today. However, outside of the new stuff, Marvel also began flooding the market with reprints of older titles as well as canceled titles. This was a savvy move. On one hand, reprinting older material meant that the creatives could continue working on the groundbreaking stuff that made Marvel the house of ideas without having to stretch themselves thin. And on the other, you were meeting demands for more Marvel comics. The main way comics reached the hands of their readers at the time was through newsstands, which did have some problems stocking comics, which tended to be more expensive to handle than magazines and newspapers, so it was natural for them to only want to sell comics they could make a profit from. As for DC, let's be blunt here, at the time it felt very aimless. Even a documentary produced by Warner Brothers in 2010 couldn't mask that fact.
DC Comics were still sort of stuck in the 50s.
So, a change was needed. This would start with DC brought in Jeannette Khan to see what she could do to lift the flagging publisher. The initiative she proposed was the publication of 4 80-page giant titles: Superman Family, House of Mystery, GI Combat, and World's Finest, each titled $1. This was a moderate success. However, these titles were aimed at more younger readers, alienating fans who had stuck through the lean patches to now be ignored. But Khan was successful and had another edict in mind, which she issued: no more reprints. Her reasoning was quite sound. Reprints only pad out a comic, and it wasn't fair to the reader expecting newer material. Quality content like the Ra's al Ghul and Swamp Thing stories would be reprinted as collector's edition, but they were the exception, not the rule. Keep in mind, the trade paperback wasn't a thing back then. This was actually a good decision for the long term, one I agree with. Why would readers bother reading something they may have already read before? However, this decision would have some drastic short-term effects combined with the So DC's plan was to basically fight fire with fire. If Marvel was flooding the market with comics to gain more customers, well, they would have to do the same. Unfortunately, this is where the cumulative effect of everything I talked about before came to a head. While Marvel was flooding the market with comics, a sizable number of them were reprints that were less taxing for them to produce. For DC, not only were they publishing a lot of new comics, which subsequently meant a lot more people needed to be involved and a lot more money was now on the line, there was an increase to the page count of existing titles. This meant a workforce stretched to the breaking point, leading to a lot of lackluster titles. It got so bad, it seemed like even Mother Nature had set out to stop DC's efforts. And I'm not joking. There were severe blizzards in 1977 and 1978 throughout the United States, causing disruption across supply chains. Naturally, when people were struggling to get hands on stuff like food and other necessities, comic books became a really low priority. Now, some of you are probably thinking, hey, wouldn't Marvel be affected by these disruptions as well? I'm sure they were, but for DC the situation was much more dire. For comparison, imagine trying to release a game-changing movie in theaters in 2020. You were going to have to accept serious losses no matter how good your movie was. While a lot of them were new stuff like the Vixen and Black Lightning, signifying DC's efforts to represent more of their readership, a lot of old characters and concepts were dug out to meet targets like Jack Kirby's New Gods and Aquaman. Now, the publicity stunt of the DC explosion had worked to an extent, and some of the titles published were actually really good. I've read Tony Isabella's Black Lightning and I highly recommend it. But eventually, the bubble burst. Not only were 17 titles cancelled directly as a result of the implosion, as it would become known, but the ripple effect would lead to 14 other titles getting canned as well. Almost all new freelance workers, except Green Lantern artist Alex Sivuyk, were fired, including now legendary figures like Frank Miller, Tom DeFalco, and James DeMatteis. And even editors like Larry Hama and Al Milgrom were shown the door. I'm not gonna read out the list of all the titles cancelled or that didn't even get published, as that information is easily accessible online. But I would like to note that Detective Comics, the comics which named the company, nearly got cancelled in favor of the better-selling Batman family. But protests from several people like Paul Levitz and Mike Gold allowed the book to continue, albeit by merging it with Batman Family. Several of the cancelled and unpublished titles would end up as backup features in comics that survived the purge, like Firestorm, who had ended up as a backup feature in The Flash. For those of you who saw the CW show, the inclusion of Firestorm in that show was probably a nod to this. For the titles that didn't, they ended up in an Ashcan series called Cancelled Comics Cavalcade, a 2-issue series published by DC solely to keep their copyrights. Good luck getting a physical copy, as only 40 of those were printed just for the people who had worked on the material inside. As for Marvel, most of the creative staff tried their best to help out those who lost their jobs at DC, with several of them finding work at the company. However, there were definitely those higher up who were probably feeling a little bit pleased with themselves right about now. After all, DC had tried to do what Marvel had done and fallen flat on their faces. And so they continued to flood the market with their product to drown out the competition, all the way to bankruptcy. Check out SF Debris' excellent video series, The Rise and Fall of the Comic Empire, to see how that happened. Finally, what about DC? Well, things would be bad for a while, even getting to the point where there were talks of Marvel writing DC's characters. However, they persevered and eventually steadied themselves. Not just steadied, but in the 80s, DC would go on to publish some of the most acclaimed works of all time. Turns out, what DC needed wasn't an explosion, but an invasion. But that's a story for another day. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you watched this far, consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel if you haven't, and leave a comment down below. I know you get that same spiel from most content creators on YouTube, but seriously, these little things help us out a lot by showing the algorithm that there are people willing to watch this content, leading to them recommending it to other people. So yeah, once again, thanks, and I hope to see you here for the next one.